Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating moment in history, a time when the total collapse of one nation actually led to a massive creative boom in another. It's an incredible story about how closing a door to the outside world can sometimes be the very thing that helps a nation find its own unique voice. So let's just dive right into the central question. I mean, it seems like a bit of a stretch, right? How does a collapsing empire have anything to do with a cultural renaissance next door? Well, as you're about to see, the connection is surprisingly direct. And to get it, we've got to start with the empire that was falling apart. For hundreds of years, Tang China was the undisputed superpower of East Asia. I mean, it was the center of gravity for everything: culture, politics, technology. But, by the middle of the 8th century, that center was starting to break. Now, this wasn't some sudden event. It was a slow, agonizing collapse that went on for almost 200 years. It kicks off with a massive rebellion, then the central government completely loses its grip to regional warlords, and then to top it all off, a rebellion led by a salt smuggler, basically a mafia boss, just tears through the heart of the country. The entire system was just disintegrating. Yeah, this quote you see here, it totally nails it by comparing the situation to Fist of the North Star. If you know the anime, you know it's set in this post-apocalyptic wasteland where society has just crumbled. And that's exactly what China was becoming, a lawless landscape where the only thing that mattered was brute force. Imperial laws, they meant nothing. Okay, so while China is imploding, let's hop over to Japan. Turns out they were dealing with their own huge problems. See, the system of government they had copied wholesale from China, well, it just wasn't working out for them at all. On paper, Japan was supposed to be this super centralized bureaucratic state, just like its neighbor. But the reality? Oh, it was a total mess. The land system failed right out of the gate, and the imperial court in Kyoto had been completely taken over by the Fujiwara clan, who were basically treating the state treasury like their own personal piggy bank. And get this is the really wild part. Because they were always broke, the government made a pretty radical choice. They officially disbanded the National Army. The state was, for all intents and purposes, completely unarmed. It was this giant power vacuum just waiting for someone to fill it. And, well, nature abhors a vacuum, right? A new force started to rise up. The court began hiring these fierce horsemen from the north as mercenaries. At the exact same time, you have farmers out in the provinces getting sick of their tax shipments getting robbed, so they start arming themselves. And these two groups, they were the seeds of what would eventually become the samurai. So the stage is set. You've got total chaos in China on one side and a corrupt, unarmed government in Japan on the other. And it's against this backdrop that one man, a scholar and an official, makes a recommendation that is going to change the course of Japanese history forever. That man was Sugawara no Michizane. Now, he was supposed to lead the next big official mission to China. These were a huge deal, called the Kentoshi. But he was hearing these horror stories from merchants coming back from the mainland. So he basically went to the emperor and asked, look, this journey is dangerous, but more importantly, why are we doing this? What is there left to learn from a failed state? And so, in the year 894, the court actually listened. They agreed to temporarily call off the missions to China, a temporary pause that would, as it turned out, become permanent. And just like that, the bridge was closed. After more than 200 years of constantly looking to the mainland for everything, Japan made the huge decision to unplug. That official pipeline of culture and politics was shut down. Now, you might think this is just a political story, but this one decision had this massive, almost immediate cultural effect. With the pressure to be like China suddenly gone, Japan started to look inward for the first time. You have to understand, for centuries, if you were anyone important in Japan, you wrote everything in classical Chinese. It was the language of power. But it was a terrible fit for their actual spoken language, the Yamato Kotoba. After 894, they really ramped up the development of a brand new script, hiragana, which was simple and phonetic. It finally allowed them to write the way they actually spoke. This new way of writing just uncorked a creative explosion. It was called Kokufu Bunka, or national culture. The world's first novel, The Tale of Genji, was just around the corner, written in this new script. Poetry, art, architecture, everything started to shake off those Chinese influences and develop a style that was uniquely, purely Japanese.
They stopped imitating and they started creating.
And here's where it gets even cooler. This whole thing wasn't just happening in Japan. The collapse of the Tang dynasty sent these shockwaves across the entire region, and it led to this kind of great uncoupling from the Chinese cultural world.
You gotta think of Tang China as the cultural mainframe for all of East Asia. It was the central server everyone was connected to. So when that mainframe crashed, everybody who was plugged into it was suddenly forced to develop their own unique operating system. The Kitsan people up north, they created their own script. The Tongits to the west, same thing. Japan's creation of hiragana was part of this much bigger region-wide reboot.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? It's something pretty profound, I think. Japan's choice to unplug from that collapsing superpower wasn't just a smart political move. It was the very catalyst that allowed it to forge its own lasting identity. Which leaves us with a really interesting question to chew on. Does a culture sometimes need to cut itself off from the world to truly find its own voice?